As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
All right, here's a quick pop quiz. What do Kim Kardashian, Justin Bieber, and Mr. Beast all have in common, other than 1 billion followers on social media? Yeah, they all use Shopify to run their businesses. An often overlooked secret of success is actually the businesses behind the business making selling simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret secret, with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going... So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Kim uses for Skims. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/theathletic. It's all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/theathletic to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/theathletic.
The Athletic.
Will 2024 be the first MotoGP championship decided by the inability to smell rain? That is a possibility after the first Misano race, in which Jorge Martin made a disastrous call to pit for wet tyres at a time when he really didn't need to, and as a result saw a championship lead that had just started growing again slashed to 7 points over Pecco Bagnaia. This is the Race MotoGP Podcast. I'm Matt Beer. Simon Patterson is still in the Misano Media Centre as we record. Val Khorounzhiy here too. And gosh, that was... We've got used to talking about Jorge Martin making wild gambles. This was a wildly conservative gamble on this occasion. As usual, we've got loads of questions from the Race Members Club to get through during this episode, but most of them are actual sort of statements of complete confusion and bafflement more than questions this time. So I'm just going to rattle off a few to start with. Dan Neal says, I normally avoid the obvious topics, but what the flying F was Martin thinking? Matthias Kainz, hope your back's feeling better, Matthias, says, is there a reason why Jorge Martin seems inclined to make horrible gambling choices? This was on a par with Phillip Island last year. Did he not have anybody telling him play it safe during weekends like this? Colm says surely Martin has to simply follow Bagnaia on the tyres. He's consistently his own worst enemy. So, Simon, you've just heard from Martin not long ago. What was Martin's defence for making the pit call that left him lapped 15th in the race that he probably could have won if he just stayed out?
There wasn't really a defence other than he probably could have won it if he'd stayed out. He didn't really have much of an answer for it other than he felt it was the right decision, and it wasn't. plain and simple. It wasn't the right call. I mean, it's one of those weird days where Pecco Bagnaia had the hardest job, because we've seen repeatedly in wet weather races, the hardest job in the world is the guy in front. It's the one who's leading the way, because they're the one that hits the damp spots first. They're the ones that crash out. They're the ones that, kind of have to assess the conditions for everyone else. You remember that Moto 2 race in Portimao in 2022 where like the top 10 crashed as they all hit the same damp spot, and then the race was won by like the person who was 11th at the time. Martin, all he had to do was follow Bagnaia, really, and let him decide when to dive into the pits, when to stay out, what to do. And I think he got a little bit too cautious. He thought that the safe option was wet tyres when it wasn't, and he also doesn't know how to smell rain, which is a phrase I never thought that we'd be hearing MotoGP terminology until today.
So please explain the smell of rain. Well, the smell of rain is a concept. I think most people who have been around rain knows that sometimes it makes the ground smell a bit different. But as I mentioned in the intro, this was particularly relevant on this occasion, wasn't it?
So both Pecco Bagnaia, who is part of the VR46 Academy and trains at Misano all the time, and Enea Bastianini, who lives literally a few meters from the circuit, both said afterwards that this place has a smell whenever it's raining heavily compared to whenever it's raining light, and they both decided that it didn't smell like heavy rain, and that kind of set the mood for them. I've heard other riders do similar. I've heard John McGuinness talk about this at the Isle of Man TT, about the smell of rain and knowing how to gauge the conditions from your nasal senses, which is on the face of things really odd, but whenever you think about it, it actually makes sense, especially if it's somewhere that you know really well, if it's home, which it is for both of those guys, and it's not for Martin. And they very quickly assessed that it was only a passing shower, and decided that it was the safe bet was actually to stay out. It was kind of as I said afterward, it was like a microcosm of MotoGP, listening to various guys talk about the track conditions, because Martin didn't know what was happening. The VR46 guys knew it was only raining a little bit because it smelled like it. Franco Morbidelli said it was in the hands of God, and KTM had used their advanced weather radar to determine exactly when it was going to rain and for how long. It's like that is exactly what you'd expect from all of those characters. It's weird because we've spent all weekend talking about how much local knowledge Pecco Bagnaia in particular has to Misano, and everyone has meant how quickly he's able to go around the really fast right-handers in Sector 3. And no one ever thought it would be because he knows how this place smells.
Yeah, that is phenomenal, isn't it? I love... If this ends up being the key swing in the championship, that smell of rain element will really factor in. Also, that mournful look, you could tell even through the helmet as Martin turned his head as he went into the pits, Val, it just looked like as soon as he pulled off the racetrack and saw what everyone else was doing, that he must have had a sinking feeling based on the way he looked around and saw Bagnaia sailing off into the distance.
That's why I think that the sort of the smell of rain thing is a red herring, as good of a story as it is. Ultimately, for me, this is a game theory failure, if that makes any sense, and I'll explain why. I mean, we were discussing it in the work chat as the rain was coming in, and what I felt very strongly in that moment was, if there are two guys on the grid who cannot pit, who absolutely cannot pit right now, who should not pit, it is Pecco Bagnaia and Jorge Martin. If they do not pit and the rain picks up, they lose 15 seconds the next lap. That's fine. You can live with that, and they lose it together. And the championship, goes on the way it goes on. If you're, Fabio Quartararo, you can pit. If you're Jack Miller, you can pit. If you're Taka Nakagami, you can pit, which, by the way, none of them did. So great 3 examples, Val. But, they could. They could, because for them, the idea is to, salvage a rare, super strong result in a season that has not been so kind. That's how you win a race like this, is you go against the grain. You bet that everybody else is wrong because you won't do it on track without that bet. Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia do not need to make that bet, and Martin made it. And listening to his debrief when Simon sent over the recording, I felt something like drop in my stomach, deeply when I heard Jorge Martin acknowledge that he was thinking about the race win and not about the championship. I don't even blame him so much. I don't understand how whoever is at Pramac who talks to him before the race, who talks to him during the weekend, how his crew chief, how his team boss did not do enough to prevent this. How is this possible? That's the part that I don't understand. It's not that the decision was indefensible. These are smart, good riders. Jorge Martin has run in the rain before. If it felt wet enough to potentially go for wets, fair enough. But the fact that he acknowledges that he prioritized the race win over, maybe we're just very different characters. We certainly are. I'm 100% sure of that. Because I've spent so much of the weekend before thinking, by Jove, Jorge Martin really should be, like, if I was him, I would have endless, non-stop anxiety about this title race. Because I'm watching Aprilia right now, so there's not going to be a title race in 25 or 26.
Yeah, absolutely. The only way Martin's day got even worse after the result was looking at what his bike for next year has been doing all weekend, which is sub nothing level of performance. Although it nearly took a point off him at the end, as it turned out.
Yeah. Instead of being a neurotic mess, looking at the RSGP flounder and be suddenly horrible and think, okay, it has to be this year, otherwise it's a long waiting list again. Instead of that, he's rolling the dice on random race wins. I don't get it. I don't get it.
The weekend trajectory on a graph, the title fight, was quite interesting on that front as well, because we started on Thursday thinking, this could be a chance for Martin to actually pull away a little bit more, because Pecco Bagnaia was understandably concerned about his physical condition after being dragged through a gravel trap underneath another Ducati at Aragon. He had quite a lot of pain on Thursday. Friday morning, didn't look in great shape. Friday afternoon, super fast, painkillers kicked in, looking great. Qualifying, great for Bagnaia and everyone else who is Valentino Rossi related, not good for Martin. Sprint race, at the start, Martin in the lead, turning it around, looking really good for Martin again, and then another big plunge. And it's the opposite of what Matthias in our questions referenced Phillip Island last year, when Martin did the over-aggressive thing of putting on a softer tyre than everyone else and saw his race lead disappear. It's not on brand for Martin to make a conservative gamble, which was what this was. But the key theme here is his decision-making. Whenever a decision has to be made, I'm not going to say he always makes the wrong one, because he's built this championship lead by getting a lot of conservative podium finishes on days he hasn't been the fastest. He has made good choices this year, but, when it comes to making a bad one, they're not half bad, are they? They're bad.
It's almost like this was the anti-Phillip Island last year. Like, he's been burned so badly by doing this slightly risky thing that he's now adopted this super conservative approach. And the fact that he's had this run of results this year where he's settled for races, for podiums, and it's done him well, has convinced him that that's the way to win a championship. Whereas the reality still seems to be that people like Pecco are good at kind of surfing the wave and taking it as it comes, rather than picking a strategy at the start of the season and sticking to it. They're kind of taking it day by day, and I think that is what Pecco did. I think Pecco knew that he had to take a bit of a risk, but not a massive one this weekend. But then, halfway through the race, whenever Marc Marquez is pulling away from him for the win, Pecco was like, yeah, okay, cool, I've taken my risk for the race, I'm just going to settle for this. Whereas, Martin would either have done both of those things or stayed out at the front and then crashed out of the lead fighting with Marc.
Yeah, I think, for me, weirdly enough, I'd say it's not anti-Phillip Island, it's just the exact same thing. And here's what I mean by that. It's the decision that he's taking is, if it works, I win. By a lot. And if it doesn't, who cares? But you can't do that in the championship fight. You have to plan contingency for what if it doesn't work. And again, Jorge Martin, I think, more so than even him being in a satellite team, in a sort of satellite team that feels old school in a way sometimes, in certain ways, or at least stripped down, maybe, which you wouldn't say from the performance on track, but from all the stuff around it. I'd say Pramac feels stripped down. It feels like the sense there is, you get into the race and you start the race, and then whatever happens, and it's, it's either your talent either gets you there or it doesn't. There's not so much going on with contingency planning and stuff. You either get it done or you don't. And I don't know. It's like Jorge Martin to me feels like a guy who's approaching motor racing too naturalistically right now for modern MotoGP. I don't know. It's a weird thought to formulate. I haven't fully made it work in my head yet, but that's how I feel.
You've kind of set me up nicely to...
Yes, listeners,
obviously.
Simon's smirk through Val's answer was just growing so much it nearly broke the slightly shaky Misano internet because his picture started buffering then. He's going to talk about satellite teams and title bids now,
But I'm actually not. That's the thing, because Val has kind of hit on a notch on something that, like, maybe it's not that satellite teams can't win championships. Maybe it's that this satellite team can't win a championship and they're the only one that's got a bike good enough to try.
I think that's I mean, you know, they're still in a position to. They still can, and yeah. They've averaged enough points.
But days like this make it increasingly unlikely.
Yeah.
And it was a strategic error. Then you speak to other people, and you know, we joked about the KTM weather radar, but they called it exactly correctly.
Yeah.
Other teams are investing in making sure that this stuff doesn't happen, and they have a plan for when it does.
Martin's admission that they didn't really talk about it pre-race on the grid. Then what are we doing pre-race? What other stuff is there to talk about?
What was more important to talk about?
Yeah, this is a race-changing event. This is a weekend-changing event. This is more important than anything you've done in the weekend so far.
And it was raining on the grid.
Yeah.
It wasn't a theoretical. It was raining on the grid.
Yeah, I don't get that either. I like, as I said a few times, I like Martin's spirit. There may well be something at the Pramac setup that really lets Martin's spirit thrive, and it does pull off some amazing pace and results. But yeah, like you say, this had been talked about most of the weekend, the possibility for changing weather. But as the weekend went on, it was all the commentators were talking about in the build-up to the race. It was so obvious, looking through the TV pictures. There were some clouds in the sky that might do something. Yeah, should have been part of the conversation. Oscar Robledo, another Members Club question. If you want to start throwing in Members Club questions yourselves, we have a 7-day free trial running on Patreon at the moment. Look for us, The Race, on Patreon. Come and join the fun we're having, whether you buy the full Members Club package or the Riders package just for the MotoGP stuff. We'll tell you a bit more about what's coming up in there later in the episode as well, but we would love for you to try out what we've got going on, and if you enjoy it, stick around. Oscar Robledo says, what is your take on the impact of the weekend on both Pecco Bagnaia and Jorge Martin? After the sprint, commentators were suggesting that Martin would be psychologically on top, but the bad call he made to pit in today's race, after that, has the pendulum swung the other way and is Pecco again in the ascendancy? Before either of you answer, I've kind of retired from talking about momentum and psychological advantages in MotoGP title races involving Pecco Bagnaia and Jorge Martin, because they both have such a great knack for tripping over their own toes when it seems like they're starting to pull away in a championship fight. That said, Martin has had a big lead for a little while. He's just had that lead slashed through his own mistake, and we're at Misano again. We've been talking basically since Misano 2 replaced India, we've been talking about how good that was for Bagnaia. That seemed to get dented a bit by the injury he carried into this weekend, but now we've got Misano where he won't be injured, and Martin's just blown the points lead. So, Simon?
Saturday morning in Misano 2 will be the last time that... that's not true. Sunday morning in Misano 2 will be the last time that Jorge Martin leads this championship race. I think that will be I think Pecco will do what he should have done this weekend had he not been injured. Because he was as quick as Martin in the sprint.
Yeah.
He just didn't get as good a start as him, and he had the pace. But I think he's more physically limited than he's letting on, which is what racers do and downplay things. And I think he probably could have beat Marc Marquez on Sunday if Marc Marquez had been Jorge Martin. Because again, he looked really strong and quite fighty. I think we're going to come back to Misano 2. He's going to disappear off into the distance. It's going to be a terribly boring 2 races. He's going to take the championship lead, and I think from that point then he'll just manage. Because you talked about the psychological thing, Matt. But it doesn't really affect Pecco the same way as it seems to affect Martin, in that Pecco doesn't. He has a bad weekend, but he doesn't get dented by it. He just kind of carries on the next one. It doesn't affect him over multiple weekends, I don't think. Whereas I think Martin maybe a bit more. Val's looking really skeptical at me.
Yeah, Val winced at halfway through that.
That part I'm not buying. I don't think the guy who forgot about the championship during the race today will be losing sleep over it on Monday and Tuesday. I think, honestly, the last time he'll think about this call will be like Wednesday morning or something, and then he'll approach Misano too the same.
I think that's quite long for Martin.
But also, in terms of the calendar, I do also I agree with your assessment. I do expect Misano to be a Pecco double. I think he looked in the condition to make this a double. If the two races were normal, if the Saturday start was normal, and if Sunday was fully dry, I think 37. But I think the flyaways will swing it a little back towards Martin again.
You said that you don't expect him to think about this again. I absolutely do. Because if we have another flag-to-flag race in the flyaways, I think he'll then crash out of the lead on slick tires in the wet. He'll then try and overcompensate because that seems to be, he can't get that balance right. And I can absolutely, I'm exaggerating, but I can absolutely see this hindering him if we have another flag to flag in the next 6 races, which is entirely possible.
Maybe, but I wouldn't say it's highly likely because usually, maybe Motegi, maybe Valencia. I think in some of those other places, when it rains so much that there's no flag to flag. There's just a wet race. But I take your point.
I mean, we're also coming back to Misano 2 weeks later.
I mean, he'd take that because, although I say that, but again, this weekend, if Pecco just swept it and Martin finished second 2 times, it would have been much better for his championship than what actually happened.
Exactly.
Which is wild.
I'm going to dispute the suggestion that Bagnaia doesn't get psychologically affected by things. That spell last autumn where if Martin hadn't made the bad call at Phillip Island and then had was it a tyre, was it something else in Qatar, Martin was just coming at Bagnaia, and Bagnaia did not have a pace answer for him at that point. That looked like Bagnaia feeling the pressure of his massive championship lead disappearing to someone who was faster at that point. And I can see that circumstance happening again.
I mean, he was still finishing in the podium every weekend.
And we don't know how healthy he was, I think, still, given the Barcelona situation. Was it Barcelona? True. Yeah, it was. There's too many races.
It was Barcelona where he got his leg run over.
Yeah, and then he came back, bounced back onto the podium, and Misano crashed in India and then did 7 podiums in a row to finish the season. So yeah, he wasn't winning every weekend, I get you, but he was still fairly consistent about it.
Hi, I'm Jason Alexander. Or as you probably know me, Royal Flusher 25 from WSOP, free to play app.
Poker tips with Jason.
Avoid making ego-based decisions. Like, you should fold, but you just can't let someone like Ian win. Always bragging about his precious infinity pool. But you just can't help but going all in. Full house.
I peed in your pool.
If you love poker, play poker on the WSOP free to play app. Download now.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Nurses, are you tired of spending weeks or even months finding the perfect job that matches your specialty with your ideal shift and salary? LinkedIn has improved your job search experience. Search by specialty, the shift you want to work, and the salary you want to make. Go to linkedin.com/nurses and begin searching today. That's linkedin.com/nurses.
Note, side effects may include less time finding the perfect job, working a shift that you love with a salary that can take you to St. Thomas, Jamaica, and continuous smiling because of how simple this process was.
Right, apologies to Marc Marquez and Gresini. As much as we have a habit of not talking about the race win until halfway through the podcast, I didn't think that would happen on a Marc Marquez win weekend this year. But it just has. Jorge Martin, that one's your fault. Marc Marquez won again, just 7 days after ending the wind drought, or the Grand Prix wind drought, 8 days after ending the wind drought. He did it in very characteristic Marc Marquez style. Drizzly track, changeable grip. Marquez makes everyone else look a little bit daft. the groundswell of curiosity from the members club about this is all about Marquez and the championship now. So let's head to that first. Eric, Yip, Oscar and Dan, all with variations on 53 points gap. Is he a title contender? Simon, is Marquez a title contender again now?
Yes. I'm obviously not convinced. He is increasingly looking like one. And I don't want to say he's not, because I think he might be in the next few weeks. But it's going to take a little bit more to kind of convince me that it's there every weekend. I think that things have been, these... We said that Misano or Aragon was a weird one because it was low grip conditions. He said himself that he expected this weekend to be a reset back to where he was in Austria. And that's kind of where he was all weekend until the low grip conditions arrived. And then suddenly he was Marc Marquez, weird alien that's able to ride whenever there's no grip. But it only happened because it rained. Otherwise, he would have finished third again, probably. And I think that is the bit that's the bit that means I don't immediately think he's a title contender, but at the same time anything can happen, and weird circumstances will raise their heads, and the other two might knock each other off and leave Mark to win a race somewhere that then suddenly puts him right into contention. But I think it's a long shot. I think it takes other people's misfortune more than anything else.
Let's talk about what it means being a title contender, I guess. We have 200-something points left up for grabs. Mathematically, Franco Morbidelli and Marco Bezzecchi are title contenders. I find it difficult to answer this question holistically, because if the question is, do Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia now have to concern themselves with where Marquez is in terms of the classification, day in, day out? I think the answer to that is no. And I think the same is for Enea Bastianini. But... are both Marquez and Bastianini within the margin of error? Yes, I think so. Are they within the margin of a broken collarbone or, I don't know, God forbid, snapped tibia or something? Again, God forbid, let's not. But, they're close enough to score enough to where if stuff really goes wrong for both of those excellent riders, then it's winnable. On pure performance, as Simon says, I came away with a similar impression from this weekend at Misano. Maybe Mark was a close third to the other two guys, but that's not enough. I mean, if you remember back to the wonderfully uncontroversial, completely unmemorable title race of 2015 between Jorge Lorenzo and Valentino Rossi.
I don't recall anything about that year.
Can you remind us?
No,
I look, it was a long time ago. What I remember, and the most important part of it, obviously, is there was, a gap, and it didn't feel like that big a gap to make up for Lorenzo and Rossi, and towards the end of the season, Lorenzo was consistently a little bit quicker. And it was only barely just enough with some other stuff mixed in. I don't remember what stuff, but, maybe you do. It's 50 is maybe a weekend and a half, but it's not realistically a weekend and a half. It could be a weekend and a half, but you can't count on that. And Mark isn't even consistently a little bit quicker than Jorge and Pecco. He would need it to rain basically every time. Rain on Friday afternoon, rain in Q2, and not like rain, but rain just enough to bring out his magic without letting anybody else, equalize it, come close to it. I mean, that's a lot to ask for, isn't it?
Okay, counter-narrative here, though. He was 83 points off the championship lead after Austria. He's now 53 off the championship lead to a different championship leader as well. He's gained on both of them. Now, the circumstances of those two races have contained enough bizarre things that you can't say, yes, he's gaining 30 points per weekend consistently. By Japan, he'll be in the lead. I'm not suggesting that. But... we talk about psychologically, we talk about confidence and that sort of thing. Marquez is winning on this bike now. He's had chances to, and he's not got it done earlier in the season. Now, this feels different. I don't think he's a full-on title contender. I don't think it's a full three-way fight yet, but suddenly he's not just a kind of marginal presence he had been for a few months. He's part of this now. If either of them messes up, second is surely vulnerable. I think they do need to be looking at exactly where he is now.
I mean, if two of the remaining races were at the Circuit of the Americas and the Saxon Ring, he'd be a title contender.
Yeah.
Because he'd have that opportunity to win and score big points versus them. But I don't think he does. I think Val's right. He's not consistently delivering week on week. He's not consistently faster than them. I don't think it's gonna. Yeah, I don't see a swing point. I don't see, unless something happens, unless there's a dramatic, and that could happen to one of them. You're right, and second place could be on offer if something goes wrong for either of the two main protagonists. But right now he is a secondary protagonist to those guys.
Until like an hour before the start of the Grand Prix, this was the most normal MotoGP weekend you could ask for, right? High grip track that everybody knows super, super well. All the sessions running basically exactly as you'd expect him. And Marc qualified 9th because he crashed. And if he didn't crash, he'd be on the second row at best. Even if he beats them somehow, it's a low probability outcome. Chances were good he doesn't. I mean, it doesn't feel different to me. The Aragon win doesn't feel different to me. This one doesn't feel different to me, which is not to say they're not valuable. It's still, look, again, it's incredible that Marc is a magician who can make the best MotoGP riders, the best riders in the world, look so deeply ordinary when things get just a little bit weird. I mean, that's phenomenal. And in 2025, when he has a better bike under him, I think that will make all the difference. I think every time there will be a few spots of rain, the people who he's fighting will go, no, this is, all right, we go next weekend. Because that's how it went in, whatever, 16, 17, 18, 19. That's always how it felt. There weren't conditions where he wasn't good. But with the GP23 versus the GP24, with no still like normal win, no, it doesn't feel different for me.
Yeah, and I don't think anything has substantially changed for Marc Marquez because he's Marc Marquez. I think that he's always on the crest of a ton of confidence because he's a 6-time MotoGP world champion and he damn well knows it. So I don't think it really alters that he's suddenly now able to win, because he's always thought he was going to win in this. I asked him that last weekend in Aragon when he thought he'd win in this bike, and he was like, Valencia test. So it's always been there, and I don't think that the kind of proof of concept has changed too much for him.
Just to put to bed something one of the members asked as well, Eric did ask, has any upgrade been given to his bike? Is it still the one that Pecco started last season with? Has anything changed mechanically for Marquez in recent weeks?
As far as we know, there's been a few little alterations made, but it's like personal preference stuff. It's not big game changing, and it's all cosmetic aero stuff that we can see. That there's not the new ride height device in all 4 GP23s. There's not substantial under the skin improvements. It is largely what he has always been riding,
and it doesn't sound like that's changing for the rest of the year, presumably. No. At this point.
It'll be interesting to see in Monday's test whether or not there's a GP24 that's made available for him to maybe have a blast on and just get a bit of feedback on, but he won't race it.
Yeah, that'd be interesting if that happens, though. You touched, Val, particularly on what Marquez does in these conditions and riders next year having to think, bit rainy, this could be bad for the rest of us. So a particularly provocative question from Esteban Rivera. True or false? Races like today confirm Pecco Bagnaia has won due to a huge bike advantage, but is not at the same level as the great riders. Lots of shaking head. But this is basically, I see where Esteban is coming from with this, because when it started to rain in the way it did, Bagnaia was suddenly being reeled in, and there was a point where like Brad Binder would be sweeping past him. In the end, Marc Marquez swept past everyone. I put that more down to Pecco's championship situation than ability. But, yeah, Marquez has a habit of doing this sort of thing, just finding the grip when no one else can. And next year, Marquez is on exactly the same bike as Pecco Bagnaia.
No, but I'd like to point out, because I also get where this is coming from 100%. But, like, is Jorge Lorenzo a great rider / champion as that goes? Because I've seen Jorge Lorenzo really stink up the place in the wet in certain races in the past. Like, I've seen some real not good stuff. Is Dani Pedrosa a great rider? Because I remember some races that were horrifying because he couldn't put the temperature into the tires. Guys can be great while not being the absolute best at a facet of the game. I think Pecco Bagnaia rode a really impressive race. He, he obviously paced himself right while being the guy hitting all the wet patches first. As soon as he found a bit of confidence on track, he was super fast again. I mean, you look at how his lap times bounce back, and it's super impressive. I mean, of course, the machinery is helping him, but it depends on what we want to prioritize, right? Because these flag-to-flag races, again, they're important in the grand scheme of a title battle, but they're not the number one overriding factor of who fights for the title. I mean, if this was MotoGP, if MotoGP was, no grip, sprinklers on track every round, I mean, every season for the past 10 years would be a Marc Marquez, Jack Miller title battle that Marc Marquez would win. Okay.
Bit harsh on Brad Binder.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm being a little bit facetious, but, I think it's also convenient that, like, for instance, Miller doesn't seem to get his plaudits for being a wizard in those conditions, because he still is, maybe less so in the KTM, maybe a little bit of that has gone away, but we've seen some phenomenal stuff from him. But that doesn't automatically make him, like, an elite tier rider, right? It's just, it's skill sets, it's what you're good at. I think that's too harsh on Pecco, and he wasn't slow today.
I think he was really fast today, given the circumstances he was facing, and I don't think it takes anything away from the fact that he is a very, 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 very talented rider. He started the race incredibly. He looked like he had the race won early on until the rain came. Then the rain came, and he was suddenly the guy who was out in front of the track, being forced to suss out the conditions for everyone else while fighting for a championship, which is tough. He coped with that pretty well. And then Marc came past him, and I think he immediately made the calculation of, I'm going to let him go. Initially, because he wanted Marc to be the person sussing out the conditions, and partly because he knew that there was no real harm in letting Marc take 5 points off him. So I think today actually was a pretty good example of why I think Pecco is a very deserving champion, because it was pure Pecco calculation. It was a real, like, we've said this before, he's dovey, but he can fight. Yeah. It was one of those really calculated Pecco. He made a decision today to decide what way the whole race was going to go for pretty much everyone, and he made it work. Yeah,
there are times when being championship leader, or in this case title contender, means you don't actually get a chance to look as impressive as someone with less to lose. Mm-hmm. And I do think...
And Marc had nothing to lose today. Nothing at all. He was under no pressure to do anything today.
But I should also say, I want to make it clear, I do understand the question, because, we all have a lot of time and a lot of respect for Pecco and his ability, and that's clear. But it is also true that he is in a good position right now to become a 3-in-a-row champion, that's incredible company, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's always fair when you've got by far the best bike on the grid to wonder how you can, like, you're no longer being compared to just your peers. I mean, I think Jorge Martin's great, but you're no longer being compared just to Jorge Martin at this point. He isn't your yardstick anymore. Your yardsticks are Lorenzo, almost like Marquez and Rossi. So I understand the desire to view it from that angle. I get it.
The only thing I want to add to that is that no one is saying Pecco has the best bike and he's only winning because of it whenever he's like 10 seconds up the road in Austria ahead of all the other GP24s. When he does his thing, it's like Jorge Lorenzo again. When he does his thing, when it clicks and he just metronomes his way into domination, no one then says, oh, the bike's pretty good, isn't it? Because he's beating people who are on the same terms.
Yeah, Val's point about how 3 in a row will put Pecco in some really rarefied company. This is one we'll definitely get into over the winter, because we all have massive respect for Bagnaia. He's doing an amazing job. He is deserving these titles. I think if he keeps notching up title after title, and actually this might not be the case because the Marquez presence next year will make it a different question. If he beats Marquez to a championship on the same bike, suddenly it's like, okay, that's cleared some question marks up that skeptics might have still had. Although skeptics might then go, well, it's not Marquez of 2019, it's not fully fit Marquez, all of that kind of thing. But yeah, he's, in a way, the more titles he racks up, the more likely it'll be that people will be going, well, you're only doing this because your bike's this good, because are you really as good as a Jorge Lorenzo? But increasingly, I think he might be.
There are worse things to be than the Sebastian Vettel of MotoGP, aren't there?
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This episode is brought to you by Ring. From package deliveries to lonely pets, Ring cameras and doorbells make it easy to check in from anywhere, right from your phone. Be there with Ring. Learn more at ring.com.
We've given a lot of plugs to the Race Members Club during this episode. Here's another one. During the gap before Misano 2, we'll have, sorry, producer Johnny, I'm going to spring this on you now, mid-episode. We'll have 2 MotoGP Extra specials for the Members Club. So if you take up the Patreon free 7-day trial, you can enjoy both of those. One of them will be answering a load more of your questions that we haven't got into in this episode or last week's. Every time we don't get to one of your questions in these episodes, they go into a special mug where I write them on a piece of paper and draw them out at random for bonus members episodes. We've got loads of topics. Lots of you have asked non-MotoGP things about things going on in Moto2, Moto3 as well, which these guys will love getting into, and I'll feel very educated by the time they finished answering. We'll talk about Aprilia's problems, because that was quite a spectacular weekend in a bad way for Aprilia. Loads more of that sort of thing in MotoGP Extra, but also something very different. Our roving reporter, Ollie Card, who you've last heard from behind the scenes at the British Grand Prix, has been behind the scenes somewhere different. He went to the Goodwood Revival to have a bit of time with TT winner Davey Todd, chatting about riding a 1929 motorbike at that event, and just generally getting in the motorbike scene at the Revival, giving a taste of why biker gangs, biker fans, and teams, riders get involved in that event, which is so different to the modern MotoGP and Superbike scene. So those are both coming up in the gap before we're back at Misano again, along with another normal episode as well, which might be themed on things that go on in the post-race test. Let's see what that throws up. Speaking of the post-race test, though, by the time you listen to this, that test will probably be underway. One of the things people will be looking at is the concession bikes and how Honda and Yamaha are doing, what they're bringing. There were no Repsol Hondas on the grid on Misano race day due to Luca Marini and Joan Mir both being ill. Can't say I particularly noticed the lack of Repsol Hondas on the grid, but it was kind of ironic that about an hour after another race took place with no Repsol Hondas, Repsol officially announced that it is ending this near 30-year relationship, this iconic partnership that Repsol and Honda have had. Mr. Ice Cold Andy 23, shortly before the Repsol announcement came out, actually, he put this question in on Patreon. He said it's the 4th time since 2021 in main races that there have been no factory Honda riders on the starting grid. Will there even be any sponsors on next year's bike? They are so horrifically bad, and there seems to be no light at the end of the tunnel. The Repsol news does put Honda's situation into perspective yet again, doesn't it? The riders pulled out because they were ill. It wasn't anything to do with the bike or the team's competitiveness this weekend, but this is just dismal, isn't it? And the fact that Repsol is going just shines a fresh light on this enduring drudgery at Honda. Is Repsol leaving simply because things are just too rubbish now?
I don't think it's because things are rubbish. I mean, it sounds a little bit like there's an element of this being a strategic decision where Repsol have wanted out for a while, even while Marc Marquez was still there. There's been persistent rumours, and that it's linked to their business as much as their love of MotoGP and hatred of where the Honda is right now. I think maybe the absence of Marquez has sped it up a little bit, but there's still a Spanish world champion in the team, in the form of Joan Mir. It's not like it's a doom and gloom disaster zone, and they're probably paying a whole lot less money without Marc being there. Well, I think we're pretty sure they are, from what we understand of the rules or the situation. It's a tough one. It's a tough one to call without knowing the reason for the decision making. But I don't think it's tied to the performance, simply because the performance isn't going to last forever. It's going to come back. Maybe they just want a cheap deal for 2 years until the 2027 rules kick in, where everyone immediately, repeatedly insists on calling them Repsol Honda anyway, because we will for all of next season. Let's be honest, we're going to repeatedly say Repsol Honda regardless who sponsors the bike, and then they're going to return in 2027 at a lower price with a better bike and win a championship with Joan Mir and be very happy.
The hilarious prediction we've heard on one of these this season,
or with Marc Marquez in 2027. There's a hilarious prediction.
I was going to say, yeah, when you were talking about Repsol probably coming back when things are better, you were making that prediction about Marc Marquez and Honda not that many months ago, and that seemed a little bit more distant now. Val, you wrote a little opinion point on the race website alongside this announcement, saying that actually maybe a clean break is quite well timed here, because Repsol Honda carries a lot of successful history, and this is not a successful period. I can see the logic of that. You like you put it, we used to seeing Repsol bikes winning for decades. So now, actually, maybe a bit of time not seeing Repsol bikes being 20th is probably good for Honda.
Yeah, I think it's a cross around their necks, consciously or unconsciously. The fact that this used to be the defining bike of MotoGP, I think that Repsol color scheme out front. For all the titles Yamaha also won. But the one I think of from the most recent era all the time, it's the Repsol colors, it's the Repsol bike, of course because of Marc, but also, through, Casey Stoner, Danny Pedrosa, and before that. And this is not that team and this is not that bike. I mean, yeah, it shares a lot of the people, but there is clearly a realization there that everything's being, torn down and starting from scratch. And if it isn't, it should be. It's easy to overstate because it's not like they're 15 seconds off a lap. They're, it's not a good bike, but it's by old MotoGP standards, it would just be kind of slightly embarrassing rather than horrifying to the point of title sponsor termination or whatever. Which, by the way, I agree with Simon. I think it feels like most sponsor terminations aren't normally results based, but maybe we'll find out more going forward. For me, it's just. It feels right. They need a fresh start. They need to go again. They need to build their own new identity independent from that better past team. None of the iconic Repsol Honda riders are riding for them anymore. None of the guys currently on the Honda have had much of a chance to achieve anything on the Honda. Everybody has to go again. Everybody has to start from zero. And for me also, part of it is they're not owed anything. I think this is where I disagree with you, Simon. I don't buy it that they'll just be back. I know it's Honda, but the world changes a lot and this sport has changed a lot. They can be back. They have the resource to be back. I don't think, everybody says they'll be back sooner or later. I think they are the ones, more than anybody else, who needs to never listen to that, who needs to not believe that. They need to feel right now that either we get this right or this is our next 10 years.
I agree. But I'm when I say that, I'm basing it on what we've seen from Yamaha, who were in an equally bad position, maybe not quite as bad, but realized it and then made real significant, massive wholesale change the way that a Japanese factory never has before, and are now starting to see the light at the end of that tunnel. And I think that Honda, from what we see, Honda are now committing to a similar process. They're just like 18 months behind in it. And I think that we're pretty sure we know the reasons why it's like this. It's because they kind of initially refused to play the aero game, let it get away from them, was relying too much on Marc Marquez riding around problems on the bikes. It's a pretty familiar story, and I think that they know that now. They've kind of realized the error of their own ways, and they are working to change it. And that's why I'm saying, and I'm not just saying it to be flippant, that they're never, that they're going to be back again. I'm saying it because they look like they've actually committed to doing the right thing with it.
That does neatly bring us on to Yamaha, because one of the things that was striking about looking at the points today in the wake of the Repsol announcement was that Honda is drifting away from Yamaha in the Manufacturers' Championship. Honda's drifting well away from Yamaha in the Teams' Championship. Repsol Honda's drifting away from LCR Honda in that, but that's another story, really. Fabio Quartararo had a very decent by current Yamaha standards weekend, culminating in 7th in the Grand Prix. Lots of people from the members club making positive noises about Yamaha. We'll go with Angelina's question. She said, with Fabio being firmly in the top 10 this weekend, did Yamaha actually find at least a bit with their recent updates? Or is it just the fact they've tested here recently and Fabio had a good weekend? Ooh, let's go to Yamaha Skeptics Corner first, because Val's waving at me.
Well, okay, so Fabio's version of events was that the Misano test knock-on was only really felt in FP1. I would suspect it went a bit further into the weekend than that, but he might be right. It doesn't sound like there was a major kick-on from the upgrades. You'd have heard about it if it was specifically just, oh, this bike is transformed now. For me, it's a question of a reasonably compliant track that they know very well that offers really high grip. There's still a long road here. There were some genuine highlights during the weekend. There were bits where it looked really genuinely good. There were bits where, I looked at the live timing and I was like, oh, I'm gonna face some Schadenfreude going into the pod where it'll be pointed out to me that actually Yamaha looked quite good. Which is nice. I mean, Fabio and Alex deserve for it to look good. I still think I'm not convinced this was like a step, not massively, and we won't know at Misano 2 either necessarily. We'll maybe get a slightly better idea of Misano 2 because that's where whatever extra experience they have of the track will be less valuable. But I don't know. It doesn't feel that significant to me yet.
I don't think there's any steps in this process, and I don't think this weekend was a step, but I think they're on a gradual up ramp, and this was just another day on that ramp where it's going in the right direction. I don't think that they're making massive game-changing improvements at every single test or anything like that. I think they're just slowly getting better, and then this showed again that they're slowly going in the right direction rather than anything else. I don't think that it's going to be fixed in increments. I think it's going to be a case of you watch them and you kind of don't watch them because they're at the back, and then suddenly you realize, oh, they've actually been like 2 places further ahead for the last 3 races, and then a few weeks later or a few months later you realize, oh, they've actually been a couple more places further ahead, and then suddenly Fabio's fighting for a podium again. I think that's the process we're going to see here, rather than they bring something new one day and Fabio wins a race. I think it's going to be more gradual, more gentle. They're going to kind of ghost their way back to being at the front. But to me, then that makes this weekend like nothing spectacular in that process. It's just another little bit along the road.
It does help that also Aprilia has collapsed into a heap of overheating and total nonsense. I mean,
Aprilia have done. They've been really impressive this weekend and done what they normally do in the flyaways before we've even left Italy.
I think I know the rest of that sentence.
I mean,
but we'll see.
Yeah, normally things go disastrously wrong when we go to Asia for them, and this year they're getting to do it here at home. It's lovely.
Yeah, that is fair enough, and that is definitely making Fabio particularly and Yamaha look better right now. But still in the results today, Quartararo is not that far behind Brad Binder in contention to be top non-Ducati, and drizzle or no drizzle, that's a long time since we felt Yamaha might be in position to do that. It also makes me kind of weirdly look forward to Jack Miller and Miguel Oliveira, two riders I'm not that positive about in this podcast usually, but I'm looking forward to them being on the Yamaha to give us more benchmarks for just how good a job Quartararo's doing as well, because all the time Alex Rins is clearly not. Yeah, Val's just pointed to the sky to indicate how well he thinks Quartararo is riding on that Yamaha. And as much as I think Rins' form is kind of injury compromised, I am inclined to agree with that. It's been a heartwarming race day at Misano. I do want, before this podcast ends, I do want to mention how lovely it was that Marc Marquez very quickly referred to Fausto Gresini. He was racing the special Fausto Gresini colours today. Obviously, this is a home win for Gresini. Is a very special thing these days since they lost Fausto. We did have one question from one of the members, I think it was JD, Simon, saying how big's your hangover going to be from the Gresini party? But I think with a test and then with your road trip beginning the second the test finishes, I don't think your hangover is going to be that big, is it? Or neither is Gresini's till tomorrow night.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'd imagine that Frankie Carcetti is out paying someone to spray down the circuit so that tomorrow's declared wet and he doesn't have to do much work. Because I'm sure they're going to have a few beers tonight. We are like almost within a stone's throw of where Gresini launched the team this year in a nightclub.
Yes,
I'd imagine there's going to be a party tonight of some sorts. I'm not going to partake because the next 36 hours is going to be a bit manic. But good luck to them, and we'll go to pit lane in the morning whenever the garage doors roll up and judge how big the party is and how Frankie looks.
The Fausto tribute wasn't the only kind of poignant bit of race day either today, was it, Simon? You've got another little bit you're really keen to get into this podcast too.
Yeah, so a really important day for the Moto2 Championship. I think Alguersu's took a big blow today with a pretty commanding win. But my favourite part of it was that so we saw the pictures earlier on in this weekend of Taka Nakagami going out to pray at the spot where Showa Tomizawa tragically lost his life at this circuit, and every day whenever we drive into the circuit, the sat-nav says you're now on Boulevard de Jaro Kato, because Kato raced for Gresini when he tragically lost his life at Suzuka in 2003. Ayogura flew a Japanese flag in the slowing down lap that was previously used on slowing down MotoGP victory laps by both Tomizawa and Kato, and has been kept by Tomizawa's mum until the right occasion, and then found its way into Agura's hands today, which I think is just a lovely connection back through the kind of the Japanese history books.
Oh yeah, and especially as well with the way Ayogura is coming up at the moment, with the fact he's coming up with Trackhouse and getting to the Aprilia has had a bad time today, but generally this feels like a good factory for Agura to be joining. And, with no offense to anyone like Nakagami or Hiroshi Aoyama, Agura feels like the most exciting Japanese guy coming through since Tomizawa.
He also conclusively, proved today that he is the guy that deserves the seat, not Joe Roberts. Like, he just drew a big bold line onto that. This is my bike. I deserve this next year. Sorry, Joe, but yeah, it's true.
And on that note, before we start getting the Joe Roberts fans joining in with questions, I think we should call a halt to this podcast. No, Val's not going to let me finish yet.
Yeah, you sure we can't do like 15 minutes on Angel Piqueras' absolutely deranged ride in Moto3, one of the craziest freaking things I've ever seen in my entire life?
Val, you absolutely can in MotoGP Extra this week, because we do have a question about it. So,
oh my God.
If you want to hear Val go on for 15 minutes about that, the Patreon free trial is on, and you can join us for the extra episode we'll do for the Members Club between now and Misano 2. But for now, we're going to call a halt to it there. I'm just sniffing the air. It looks like it's raining outside. I can smell it as well. So we've got to go off and do some other stuff. Thank you, Val. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, members, for your questions. Thank you, listeners, for your patience. As usual, we'll be back with multiple bonus episodes and also another one next week, wrapping up everything we've learned from this week's test.
The Athletic.
The wait is finally over. The new NFL season starts this week. I'm Diana Rossini, senior NFL insider at The Athletic, and my new podcast, Scoop City, is ready to be your go-to football companion this season. Twice a week, myself and Chase Daniel, who played quarterback for 7 different franchises in 14 years, will take you inside the inner workings of the NFL. You'll hear fresh intel, deep analysis, and fascinating interviews with big-ticket guests. So far, we've sat down with Andy Reid, Josh Allen, Sean Payton, and a host of others, with loads more to come. So check out Scoop City this NFL season. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.